Part 1. The Gathering Storm, 1933-1939. In the cold shadow of the Great War, the world believed it had finally earned peace. The guns had fallen silent in 1918, and for a generation, the victors promised that such slaughter would never come again. But beneath the fragile calm, the seeds of a new catastrophe were already taking root. Europe limped through the 1930s, broken in spirit and divided by resentment. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to end all wars, instead sowed bitterness across a defeated Germany. Economic ruin, national humiliation, and political chaos paved the way for a fiery orator who promised restoration and revenge. His name was Adolf Hitler. By 1933, Hitler had seized power, transforming Germany into a totalitarian state. He crushed political opponents, silenced the press, and filled the skies with the banners of the swastika. The world watched with unease, but few could imagine the scale of what was to come. In secret factories, forbidden weapons were being built again, tanks, bombers, and artillery, the tools of a new world war. Across the globe, other empires stirred. In Italy, Benito Mussolini dreamed of resurrecting Rome's ancient glory. His fascist regime invaded Ethiopia in 1935, testing the League of Nations' will and finding it weak. In Asia, Imperial Japan, driven by militarists, expanded its reach into China and the Pacific. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and the brutal war in China that followed revealed Japan's ambition, domination of Asia through steel and fire. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin ruled through fear. Millions perished in purges and forced collectivization. Yet behind the terror, the Red Army grew, preparing, though unknowingly, for the most brutal campaign in human history. The democracies of the West, Britain, France, and the United States hesitated. Haunted by memories of trench warfare, they clung to the hope of diplomacy. Each act of aggression was met not with resistance, but with words. In 1936, Hitler marched his troops into the Rhineland, violating the Treaty of Versailles. France did nothing. Britain protested weakly. Encouraged, he reached further, forming alliances with Italy and Japan, the so-called Axis powers. The trio envisioned a world carved between them, Europe for Germany, Africa for Italy, and Asia for Japan. In 1938, the world held its breath as Hitler set his eyes on Austria. Without firing a shot, he annexed it into the Reich, the Anschluss. The following year, he demanded the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia. Britain's Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, desperate to avoid war, met Hitler in Munich and returned home proclaiming, "Peace for our time." Within months, Hitler swallowed the rest of Czechoslovakia. By September 1939, there was only one obstacle left: Poland. Hitler signed a cynical pact with Stalin, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, secretly agreeing to divide Eastern Europe between them. On September 1, 1939, German tanks crossed the Polish border under the thunder of dive-bombing Stukas. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. The Blitzkrieg unleashed Poland fell within weeks. The German war machine, fueled by speed, coordination, and terror, introduced a new word to military vocabulary: Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. Panzer divisions, supported by waves of aircraft, cut through enemy lines before defenders could react, the skies filled with the roar of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Junkers Ju-87 Stukas. Their sirens, the infamous Jericho trumpets, screamed as they dove toward their targets, spreading panic on the ground. Warsaw burned, and Europe shuddered. As Hitler celebrated victory, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, taking its half of the prize. The map of Europe was redrawn overnight, and millions were caught between two brutal empires. In the spring of 1940, the Blitzkrieg turned west. Denmark and Norway fell in a matter of weeks. Then came the Low Countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, crushed by the relentless German advance. The world was witnessing a kind of warfare never seen before. Fast-moving armored spearheads coordinated with precision airstrikes. Communication between ground and air units was instantaneous, a deadly symphony of destruction. By May 1940, the Germans invaded France. The once mighty French army collapsed in just 6 weeks. British forces trapped at Dunkirk were rescued in a desperate evacuation across the Channel, Operation Dynamo. Hundreds of small civilian boats joined naval vessels, ferrying more than 300,000 soldiers to safety. It was a miracle born of courage and necessity. Yet, as the last ships left Dunkirk, France fell. Paris surrendered without resistance. Hitler stood before the Eiffel Tower, the master of Europe, or so he believed. The island stands alone. Now only Britain remained. Across the Channel, the English coastline gleamed in the summer light, defiant and alone. Hitler prepared Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of the British Isles. But before his troops could cross, he needed to destroy the Royal Air Force. Thus began the Battle of Britain, the first major campaign fought entirely in the air. In July 1940, the Luftwaffe launched its assault. German bombers, escorted by Messerschmitt fighters, roared across the Channel. Their targets: radar stations, airfields, and cities. Britain's defense rested on the shoulders of young pilots, the few, as they would later be called. They flew Spitfires and Hurricanes, sleek machines that danced through the sky with deadly grace. Under Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, Fighter Command coordinated its forces using radar, a new technology that allowed Britain to see the enemy before he struck. The skies became a daily battlefield. Dogfights erupted over the countryside. Pilots fought until fuel and ammunition ran out, often returning with their planes riddled by bullets. Or not at all. On August 13, 1940, the Luftwaffe launched Adlertag, Eagle Day, a massive offensive meant to break the RAF. The air over southern England became a storm of fire and smoke. Yet Britain did not break. Then on September 7th, frustrated and desperate, Hitler changed tactics. He ordered bombers to target London itself. The Blitz had begun. Night after night, bombs rained down upon the capital. The city burned, but the people endured, taking shelter in underground stations, emerging each morning to clear rubble and carry on. On September 15th, the Luftwaffe made its final, decisive assault. RAF squadrons rose to meet them, outnumbered but unyielding. By nightfall, the German losses were catastrophic. The invasion was cancelled. Prime Minister Winston Churchill addressed the nation. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Britain had survived. Part 2. Fire in the East, Barbarossa and the Rising Sun. The summer of 1941 dawned bright over Europe, but the peace was deceptive. Behind Germany's triumphs, Hitler's ambition burned hotter than ever. He had conquered the West, humbled France, and forced Britain to fight for survival. Yet his eyes now turned eastward. For in his mind, the true war, the war of destiny, had always been against the Soviet Union. Germany's armies, more than 3 million strong, gathered along a front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Tanks, trucks, horses, and men filled the countryside in a massive tide of steel and dust. Hitler named it Operation Barbarossa, after the medieval emperor who had once marched eastward in conquest. At dawn on June 22, 1941, without warning, the silence broke. The Luftwaffe bombed Soviet airfields and rail lines, while columns of panzers surged across the border. The Red Army, taken by surprise, was thrown into chaos. Thousands of planes were destroyed on the ground. Entire divisions vanished in the first days of battle. The Blitzkrieg had come to the east, faster, larger, and more brutal than ever before. Soviet soldiers fought with courage but little coordination. Many were cut off and encircled in vast pockets, where they were either annihilated or captured. Cities like Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev fell one after another. Millions of Soviet troops were taken prisoner. Behind the German lines, special SS units, the Einsatzgruppen, followed, carrying out mass executions of Jews, communists, and civilians. Barbarossa was not only a war of conquest, but a war of extermination. By autumn, German forces stood at the gates of Leningrad in the north and Moscow in the center. Hitler believed victory was near. His generals spoke of marching into Red Square by Christmas. But the vastness of Russia was an enemy no map could contain. As the Germans advanced, their supply lines stretched thinner. Mud from autumn rains turned roads into rivers of sludge. Fuel and ammunition dwindled. Still, the Wehrmacht pressed on, pushing closer to Moscow. Then came the winter. The temperature plunged below minus 30 degrees Celsius. Engines froze. Oil congealed. German soldiers dressed in summer uniforms suffered frostbite and starvation. The Red Army, fighting for its homeland, launched a massive counterattack in December. Soviet T-34 tanks, built for the cold, outmatched the German armor. For the first time, Hitler's army was forced to retreat. Barbarossa had failed to deliver victory. Instead, it had opened a front so vast and bloody that it would consume millions of lives before it ended. The siege of Leningrad far to the north, another nightmare unfolded. The city of Leningrad, a jewel of Russian history and culture, was surrounded. Hitler ordered it starved into submission. For 872 days, from 1941 to 1944, the people of Leningrad endured one of the longest and most horrific sieges in human history. Food ran out. The ration for bread fell to mere grams a day. People ate wallpaper paste, pets, and even sawdust bread to survive. Yet the city did not surrender. Through the icy expanse of Lake Ladoga, known as the Road of Life, supplies trickled in during the winter months. Art, music, and poetry continued even amid hunger and death, acts of defiance in the face of annihilation. Japan and the rising sun, while Hitler's armies froze in Russia, halfway across the world another empire was on the march. For decades, Imperial Japan had sought dominance over Asia. The invasion of China in 1937 had already unleashed a storm of brutality. Cities like Nanjing witnessed horrors that shocked the world, the massacre of hundreds of thousands, the atrocities of war crimes committed in the name of empire. But Japan's ambitions extended far beyond China. The military leadership, dominated by hardliners, believed that Japan was destined to rule the Pacific. To achieve this, they needed resources: oil, rubber, and iron, all of which were controlled by Western powers. By 1940, Japan joined Germany and Italy in the Tripartite Pact, forming the Axis alliance. The West responded with economic sanctions, cutting off vital supplies. To Japan, this was not deterrence, it was provocation. In secret, Japanese planners began preparing a strike that would cripple the United States before it could react. The target: Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, a day of infamy on. The morning of December 7, 1941. As the sun rose over Hawaii, the first wave of Japanese aircraft appeared over the horizon. At 7:48 a.m., the silence of the Pacific shattered. Torpedoes and bombs rained down upon the American fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor. The attack was swift, coordinated, and devastating. Battleships exploded one after another: the USS Arizona, the Oklahoma, the West Virginia. More than 2,400 Americans were killed in less than 2 hours. Smoke darkened the sky as sailors fought to rescue their comrades from burning waters. The attack, meant to break America's will, had the opposite effect. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States declared war on Japan. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. What had been a European conflict was now a global inferno. The Pacific erupts. Japan struck across the Pacific with astonishing speed. In weeks, its forces conquered Hong Kong, Malaya, the Philippines, and Burma. The British fortress of Singapore, thought to be impregnable, surrendered in February 1942. The largest capitulation in British military history. In the Philippines, American and Filipino troops under General Douglas MacArthur fought valiantly, but were overwhelmed. MacArthur was ordered to escape, vowing, "I shall return." His men, left behind, endured the Bataan Death March, where thousands perished in brutal forced marches under the Japanese sun. Japan's empire now stretched from the Indian Ocean to the Central Pacific, a vast domain ruled by the rising sun. Yet, like Hitler, Japan had overreached. Turning points begin to form. By mid-1942, the tide began to turn. American intelligence broke Japanese naval codes, revealing their next move, an attack on Midway Atoll. In June 1942, the Battle of Midway changed the course of the Pacific War. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were sunk by American dive bombers from the carriers Enterprise and Yorktown. Japan lost hundreds of veteran pilots, a blow from which it would never fully recover. From that moment, the United States began its long climb back across the Pacific, one island at a time. Meanwhile, in Europe, a new chapter was opening on the frozen steppes of Russia, one that would dwarf all others in scale and suffering. Stalingrad, the city of fate. In the summer of 1942, Hitler launched another offensive, Operation Blue, aimed at capturing the oil fields of the Caucasus. To secure his southern flank, he targeted the city of Stalingrad on the banks of the Volga River. What began as another German advance soon turned into the bloodiest battle of the Second World War. Street by street, building by building, men fought hand-to-hand among the ruins. Soviet defenders, commanded by General Vasily Chuikov, refused to yield an inch. The city became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of national survival. Stalin himself ordered, not a step back. As winter closed in, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus, encircling the German Sixth Army. Hitler forbade retreat. When relief failed to arrive, 300,000 men were trapped in the ruins. Starving, freezing, and out of ammunition, they surrendered in February 1943. Stalingrad marked the turning of the tide. The myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered. Part 3. Tides of Steel. The Turning of the War, 1943-1944. The winter of 1943 settled over a world ablaze. What had begun as lightning conquest was turning into a struggle for survival. The Axis powers, once invincible, now faced the gathering might of the Allies. From the snows of Russia to the jungles of the Pacific, the tide was shifting. The Eastern Front roars back. After Stalingrad, the Red Army no longer fought merely to defend its homeland. It was beginning to drive the invader back. In the spring of 1943, Hitler sought to regain momentum. His plan was bold and desperate, a massive pincer assault around the Russian city of Kursk. There, in July, the largest tank battle in human history erupted. Over 6,000 tanks clashed across open fields, Tigers, Panthers, and T-34s trading fire at point-blank range. The thunder of guns rolled across the steppe for days. When the smoke cleared, the German armor lay shattered. Kursk broke the back of the Wehrmacht's offensive power. From then on, Germany would fight only in retreat, the war in the air. While the armies battled across the continent, the skies became a second front. The Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces launched massive bombing campaigns against Germany's industrial heart. Cities like Hamburg, Cologne, and Berlin were engulfed in firestorms that consumed entire districts. The goal was clear: to cripple the Nazi war machine and break the will of the German people. But the cost was staggering. Tens of thousands of civilians killed, thousands of airmen lost to flak and fighters. Still, the Allies persisted. Each night the bombers came, an unending rain of fire. The Luftwaffe, stretched thin between east and west, could no longer defend its skies, the Mediterranean front. As the Soviets pushed west, the Western Allies struck south. In July 1943, Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, began. British and American forces landed under cover of darkness, overcoming fierce resistance and treacherous seas. The fall of Sicily triggered a political earthquake. Italians turned against Benito Mussolini. The fascist leader was arrested. Italy surrendered that September. Yet the Germans moved swiftly, occupying the peninsula and turning it into a fortress. The campaign for Italy was brutal. Mountain by mountain, river by river, Allied troops advanced northward under constant fire. Cities like Monte Cassino and Anzio became names synonymous with courage and sacrifice. Through it all, the Italian people suffered, caught between retreating Axis troops and advancing Allied forces. The Atlantic War. Across the ocean, another deadly struggle raged. German U-boats prowled the North Atlantic, hunting the convoys that kept Britain alive. For years, these submarines had seemed unstoppable, sinking hundreds of merchant ships. But by 1943, new technologies began to turn the tide. Radar, sonar, long-range patrol aircraft, and escort carriers. The hunters became the hunted. The once fearsome wolf packs were destroyed in growing numbers, their crews lost beneath the waves. The sea lanes to Britain were secure once more. Supplies, tanks, and men flowed freely across the Atlantic. The lifeline of liberty was restored. The Pacific counterattack. In the Pacific, the United States and its allies began their long road of vengeance. Under Admiral Chester Nimitz, the American Navy launched a strategy known as island hopping, seizing key positions while bypassing heavily fortified islands. In November 1943, U.S. Marines stormed the beaches of Tarawa. The battle lasted only 76 hours but claimed thousands of lives. The lesson was clear: each step toward Japan would be bought with blood. Further west, General MacArthur advanced through New Guinea and the Solomons, keeping his promise to return to the Philippines. The home fronts. While soldiers fought abroad, the factories of democracy roared at home. In America, women joined the workforce in record numbers. Rosie the Riveter became the symbol of strength and resolve. In Britain, rationing, blackouts, and the Blitz had forged unity. In the Soviet Union, entire cities were relocated east of the Urals, their factories producing tanks and aircraft night and day. World War II was not merely fought by armies, it was waged by nations. D-Day, the longest day. By mid-1944, the Allies were ready to strike at the heart of Europe. The plan, months in the making, was codenamed Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied France. On the night of June 5, 1944, an armada of nearly 7,000 ships crossed the English Channel. At dawn, Allied paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines. Then, on June 6th, D-Day, the invasion began. Beaches codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword erupted in smoke and fire. Machine guns swept the sands as soldiers waded through surf and blood. At Omaha Beach, American troops suffered horrific losses. Yet by nightfall, they had gained a foothold. The Atlantic Wall had been breached. In the following weeks, Allied forces poured into Normandy. The French countryside became a maze of hedgerows and ambushes, but German resistance crumbled under the combined might of men and machines. By August, Paris rose in revolt. On August 25th, Allied troops entered the city. Crowds wept and cheered as the tricolor once again flew from the Eiffel Tower. France was free, the Eastern Hammer, while the Western Allies liberated France. The Red Army launched its greatest offensive yet, Operation Bagration, in June 1944. In a matter of weeks, entire German armies were annihilated. Soviet forces advanced hundreds of miles, retaking Minsk, Vilnius, and pushing toward Poland. The German Eastern Front collapsed. From east and west, the Allies now closed in on the Reich, the Pacific Inferno. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the struggle grew fiercer. In early 1944, American forces captured the Marshall and Mariana Islands, bringing Japan within range of long-range B-29 Superfortress bombers. From the skies above Tokyo, entire cities would soon burn under waves of incendiary bombs. Japan's empire was shrinking, but its resistance hardened. In October 1944, MacArthur returned to the Philippines. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement in history, erupted. Japanese kamikaze pilots, men willing to die for the emperor, dove their planes into American ships. It was a new, terrifying weapon of desperation. The United States lost men and ships, but the Japanese Navy was destroyed. The path to Japan lay open. Part 4. The Fall of the Reich, 1945. The new year of 1945 dawned beneath a sky of smoke and sorrow. Europe lay in ruins, its cities reduced to skeletons of stone. But within that destruction, the forces of liberation were closing in from every direction. The Reich that Hitler had promised would last 1,000 years had scarcely survived 12, the Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, when Allied soldiers thought victory was near, Hitler gambled one final time. Through the dense forests of the Ardennes, he hurled a surprise offensive meant to split the Allied armies in two and capture the vital port of Antwerp. The German attack crashed through the snow like thunder. American lines buckled. Towns such as Bastogne were surrounded. Supplies dwindled and the winter bit deep. Yet when the German commander demanded surrender, General Anthony McAuliffe replied with a single word: nuts. The siege held. Allied air power returned as the weather cleared, pounding the German advance. By January 1945, the bulge in the line had been erased, and Germany's last reserves of armor and fuel were spent. The Western Front would never again move east to west. The red tide rises. In the east, the Red Army advanced like a storm. After years of suffering, the Soviets were relentless. In January, Marshal Zhukov launched the Vistula-Oder offensive. Within weeks, Soviet tanks were on the banks of the Oder River, only 40 miles from Berlin. Behind them trailed the ghosts of 27 million dead. Villages, fields, and cities bore scars of 4 years of total war. The soldiers of the Red Army were driven not just by duty, but by vengeance. The Allies crossed the Rhine. From the west, American, British, and Canadian forces swept across France and into Germany. Bridges were blown, but one, a small span at Remagen, remained standing. When U.S. troops captured it on March 7th, the Allies surged over the Rhine. The heart of Germany was exposed. By April, Allied armies fanned out through the countryside. Towns surrendered without resistance. Others were reduced to rubble. Concentration camps were uncovered. Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, each revealing horrors beyond comprehension. Emaciated survivors stared into the cameras of the liberators, silent witnesses to mankind's darkest hour. Berlin, the final battle. Hitler refused to flee. Deep within his bunker beneath the shattered Reich Chancellery, he clung to delusions of salvation. Orders were still issued to phantom armies that no longer existed. On April 16, 1945, the Red Army struck. The Battle of Berlin began with a bombardment so intense it turned night to day. Soviet shells rained down without pause for hours. Street by street, the city was consumed. Tanks fired point-blank through walls. Snipers hid in cellars. By the end of April, Soviet troops fought within sight of the Brandenburg Gate. Hitler, realizing all was lost, married Eva Braun in a brief, joyless ceremony. The next day, April 30th, he took his own life. His body was burned in the courtyard as the Soviet flag rose over the Reichstag. Victory in Europe. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. In London, Paris, Moscow, and New York, crowds filled the streets, weeping and cheering. Church bells rang. Fireworks lit the night. After nearly 6 years, the war in Europe was over. But across the Pacific, the guns still thundered. The Pacific Inferno continues. The defeat of Germany freed the Allies to focus all power against Japan. Yet Japan refused to yield. Each island, each coral reef became a fortress defended to the death. In February 1945, U.S. Marines landed on Iwo Jima. The volcanic island erupted in smoke and fire. Japanese defenders, hidden in tunnels, fought until none remained. After 5 weeks of carnage, the island was secured. From its summit, a group of Marines raised the American flag, a moment immortalized in a single photograph that captured the spirit of endurance. Then came Okinawa, the largest battle of the Pacific War. For nearly 3 months, rain and blood soaked the island. Kamikaze planes fell in waves upon the Allied fleet. Civilians were caught between armies. When the battle ended in June, over 200,000 people were dead. Yet still, Japan would not surrender. Fire from the sky. American bombers now struck Japan's cities at will. In March 1945, Tokyo was reduced to ashes in a single night as incendiary bombs created firestorms hotter than molten steel. More than 100,000 civilians perished. Still, the war continued. The cost of invading Japan was estimated in millions of lives. And so, in a desperate effort to end the carnage, a new and terrible weapon was prepared, one born from the secret Manhattan Project, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On the morning of August 6, 1945, a lone B-29 bomber named Enola Gay appeared over Hiroshima. At 8:15 a.m., it released a single bomb. In an instant, the city vanished in light. A mushroom cloud rose into the heavens as tens of thousands were burned to ash. 3 days later, another bomb fell on Nagasaki. The age of atomic warfare had begun. Japan surrenders. Shocked by the devastation and facing invasion, Emperor Hirohito intervened. On August 15, 1945, his voice, never before heard by his people, was broadcast across Japan. He spoke of enduring the unendurable. The war was over. On September 2, 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japanese officials signed the instrument of surrender. General Douglas MacArthur looked on as flags of all Allied nations fluttered in the morning breeze. The most destructive war in human history had finally ended. The world after war. When the guns fell silent, the planet stood in stunned silence. Over 75 million people were dead. Cities had been erased, borders redrawn, empires dismantled. Out of the ruins rose two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, their uneasy alliance soon to harden into a new confrontation. The Cold War. Nuremberg put the architects of Nazi tyranny on trial. In the Pacific, tribunals judged the crimes of Japanese militarism. The world sought justice, yet struggled with the magnitude of its own grief. From the ashes came the United Nations, born of hope that humanity might never again descend into such darkness. Epilogue. Echoes of Courage. World War II had reshaped civilization. It taught the terrible price of hatred, but also revealed the unyielding strength of the human spirit. From the frozen trenches of Stalingrad to the beaches of Normandy, from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Burma, ordinary men and women had risen to extraordinary heights. Their courage bought the freedom of generations yet unborn. When you go home, tell them of us and say, "For your tomorrow we gave our today." The War Files closes its chronicle here, where the guns have gone silent but the memories endure, etched forever in the hearts of those who remember, and in the pages of history that refuse to forget. Part 5, The Legacy of World War II, A World Reborn. The guns of war had fallen silent, yet the echoes of destruction still rolled across the earth. From Europe's shattered cathedrals to Asia's smoking ruins, humanity stood before the wreckage of its own making. The Second World War had ended, but the peace it left behind was fragile, uncertain, and heavy with consequence. A world in ruins. In 1945, the world surveyed the unimaginable. Cities once alive with laughter were now skeletal remains of brick and ash. Roads were impassable, bridges gone, families scattered. Millions wandered homeless, searching for loved ones who would never return. The very landscape of civilization had been rewritten. Germany lay in ruins. Berlin, once a symbol of power, was now a scarred wasteland divided among the victors. In Japan, entire cities were nothing but plains of dust. Across Eastern Europe, borders shifted like sand. Empires that had lasted centuries, British, French, Dutch, began to fade under the weight of change. And yet, amid the devastation, the first seeds of renewal were already being planted. The price of victory. The war had cost the world more than 75 million lives. Soldiers, civilians, and the countless lost to famine, disease, and genocide. The numbers alone could not contain the tragedy. 6 million Jews had been murdered in the Holocaust, alongside millions of others deemed unworthy by the Nazi state. Entire communities vanished from the map of humanity. When Allied soldiers liberated the concentration camps, they confronted evil in its purest form. Piles of bodies, skeletal survivors, and the cold efficiency of death machinery left them speechless. The phrase "never again" was born from that silence, a vow to remember, and to prevent such horror from returning. Justice and reckoning. In the aftermath, the victors sought to bring justice to those who had unleashed the storm. At Nuremberg, 22 of the most powerful surviving Nazis were tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Their trials established a principle that would echo through generations, that no leader, no soldier, and no nation is above the law. In Tokyo, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East held similar proceedings against Japanese leaders. The trials were imperfect and controversial, yet they marked the beginning of a new international moral order. Humanity was learning, painfully, that victory without justice was hollow. The world divided. But even as peace took root, new tensions emerged. The wartime alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union fractured into suspicion and rivalry. The world split into two opposing spheres, East and West, communism and capitalism, Moscow and Washington. From the ruins of Berlin, an iron curtain descended across Europe. The Cold War had begun, a conflict of ideology, influence, and fear that would shape the next half-century. Behind the Iron Curtain, Eastern Europe came under Soviet control. In the West, the United States led the rebuilding of democracies through the Marshall Plan, reconstruction and renewal. In 1947, the United States launched the Marshall Plan, a massive economic aid program to rebuild Europe. Billions of dollars poured into factories, farms, and infrastructure. Cities rose from rubble, lights returned to darkened streets, and hunger gave way to hope. In Japan, General Douglas MacArthur oversaw a remarkable transformation. The old militarist regime was dismantled. A new constitution was written, guaranteeing democracy and renouncing war. In the span of a decade, Japan would emerge not as a conqueror, but as one of the world's leading industrial powers. The United Nations, hope from the ashes. Out of the smoldering ruins of war, the nations of the world came together to forge a new institution dedicated to peace, the United Nations. Founded in October 1945, it sought to prevent the failures that had doomed the League of Nations. Its mission was simple, yet profound, to maintain international peace and security, to uphold human rights, and to promote cooperation among nations. The UN would face many tests, and it would never be perfect. But it stood as a symbol of humanity's collective yearning to rise above conflict. The nuclear age. The atomic bomb had ended World War II, but it had also opened a terrifying new era. In the years that followed, the United States and the Soviet Union raced to build arsenals capable of destroying the planet many times over. The world now lived under the shadow of mutually assured destruction, the grim paradox that peace might depend on fear. Yet from that fear came science and progress, advances in medicine, space exploration, and technology born from wartime innovation. The same minds that had built bombs turned to curing disease, connecting continents, and reaching for the stars. Decolonization and the birth of nations. The war had also shaken the foundations of empire. Across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, colonized peoples demanded independence. India gained its freedom in 1947. Others soon followed. The end of the war marked not only a new world order, but a new world of nations. This was the war's paradox. Out of conquest came liberation. Out of destruction came rebirth. The memory of heroes. As the years passed, those who had fought began to fade into history. Yet their stories endured. From the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of Burma, from the skies over Britain to the decks of the Pacific Fleet, their courage and sacrifice became legend. Museums, memorials, and monuments rose on every continent. The names of the fallen were carved into stone so that generations to come might know the price of freedom. Children learned of battles long past and of the men and women who refused to surrender when darkness fell. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning we will remember them. Echoes through time. The legacy of World War II is more than history. It is the mirror of the human soul. It shows the depths to which hatred can drive us, but also the heights to which courage can lift us. It is a warning and a promise that freedom must be defended, that tyranny must be resisted, and that peace must never be taken for granted. Every war since, Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War confrontations, and even the conflicts of our own century, has been shaped by the lessons and shadows of that global struggle. The veterans who returned home carried those lessons with them, building nations, leading movements, and reminding the world that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the triumph of humanity over its own worst instincts, a world reborn. By the mid-20th century, the fires of war had given birth to a new age, one of reconstruction, innovation, and global interconnection. The same countries that once faced each other in battle became trading partners, allies, and architects of modern civilization. Europe rebuilt and united under the idea that shared prosperity could prevent another war. The scars remained, but they became reminders of the price of division. In the Pacific, former enemies became economic allies, bound by the common goal of progress. The world, though imperfect, had been reborn. Epilogue. The Eternal Lesson. Today, more than 8 decades after the war began, its echoes still whisper through time, in memorials, in textbooks, in the stories passed down through families. The veterans are fewer with each passing year, but their legacy endures. For every generation, the lesson remains the same. That hatred, once unleashed, knows no boundary. That tyranny, once tolerated, devours all. And that courage, once found, can redeem the world. World War II was the crucible of the modern age, a fire that consumed nations but forged the ideals of liberty, justice, and unity that still guide us. If the war taught us anything, wrote one survivor, it is that the human spirit cannot be conquered, only tested. The War Files closes its chronicle here, in remembrance, in gratitude, and in solemn reflection. For though the war has ended, its story belongs to all who believe that peace, once earned, must never again be lost. The End. A production of the War Files, written in honor of all who lived, fought, and fell in the greatest conflict of human history.